Well, hello there, and today we're going to be painting the cutest cow ever with some watercolor. So come on and join me. Okay, I'm starting out with 140-pound cold pressed paper, and I just have the edges taped off, and I've already traced it onto my watercolor paper, and I have mixed up a nice dark color. I've just used some indigo blue and a little bit of sepia, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. It's just kind of a brownish gray color. So I've mixed those two. You can also use burnt umber. I like to use burnt umber a lot, and that's going to be our darkest dark for the cow. Now I've already painted in his eyes. You see I've left some of the white of the paper showing because he's got to have some of those cute little highlights. That's what gives the eye life. So I'm going to let that dry, and I've put a little bit more of the indigo blue onto my palette, and I'm just going to do sort of a wash over his nose or her nose. I'm not sure. It's so cute you can't tell if it's a boy or a girl, but this is just a little calf. And she is just so cute. I'm gonna call her a she. She's gonna be a she from now on. I said so. And I'm just putting a wash of that sort of blue. It has just a tiny bit of the brown mixed into it in that indigo blue. And then I am just taking and dropping in some of the darker mixture that I made, just to hit those shadows, to get those shadows in there, get the nostrils in there. Because really, it's all about light and shadow when you're painting. Usually, if you're trying to get something that's semi-realistic or more realistic. We're not going for graphic here or like illustration. We're just going for sort of a nice loose painterly look. And we're filling in those dark areas. I'm looking at my reference photo, and I'm just, wherever there's dark shadows on my reference photo, that's where I'm adding the darker colors, a little bit of texture across the front part of his lip, bottom part of his nose, but that's also his upper lip. And I'm just blending it in while it's all still wet, just working it really well. And I'm going to come back. His eyes are dry. That layer has dried, so I'm adding actually some burnt umber to that eye just to give it a little bit of a brown tone. His eye is actually brown. In the reference photo it looks black, but I'm going to add a little tiny bit of brown just so that it has more than just the gray color. I'm not crazy about just the gray color. So I'm adding just a little bit of burnt umber in those eyes across that dry wash. And I'm going to add a little bit of brown here around his nostril. I see some brown shading in his nostril, so I'm going to go ahead and do that and just put that in there right onto dry paper. Now, when I started off with his eyes, I was using a number 2 ultra pointed round Loew-Cornell. That's what I started off with, and I really love those for fine detail. The only drawback with the Loew-Cornell ultra pointed round, they don't hold a lot of water, they don't hold a lot of paint, but they give exquisitely beautiful detail, like really fine crisp detail, especially in fur. So that's what I was using around his eyes, but I have changed over to my Versatiles, and I'm going through a variety of brushes. I can't find my favorite brushes, so I'm just using what I have on hand right now. So now that I'm letting his nose dry, his eyes dry, I'm just taking sort of a yellowy brown color, and I'm just going to do a wash across his face, across his ears, and I want to keep it pretty light. Remember that watercolor dries lighter. Once it's dry, it's a lot lighter than it is when you first apply it. So I know this is going to be a lot lighter. It's going to be one of my lightest colors in his face, and I'm just going to get that all over her little face there, and on her little bottom lip. We're going to get some there too. And then on she's kind of cocking her head to the side. So her side of her shoulder here, I'm just gonna also get a little wash on her shoulder. A little bit darker on her ears, but I'm just gonna spread that out. I'm not getting real fussy with it. As you see, I finally found my favorite brush. I have my Mimic brush going now. And I like it because it holds a lot of water, so it's great for washes. I didn't want to tell y'all, but I stopped the video just so I could go hunt those down. But through the magic of editing, you didn't even see me stop it to go get it. So now around that bottom lip is really dark. And she has two little teethers sticking out there. I don't know if y'all know this, but cows do not have top teeth. They only have bottom teeth. But the top part of their upper part of their mouth is really hard. They have a really hard palate, and so they use those bottom teeth to grind their food up onto the roof of their mouth and the top part of their mouth. Just a little gee whiz information there for you. So now I've jumped back to my ultra fine round, and I'm going ahead and putting in some little details around the eyes. I get a really fine line with these Loew-Cornell ultra rounds. They're my favorites for doing like eyelashes, fur, like some fur texture, or getting in really tiny spaces. Because they don't hold that much water, I don't have to worry about the water. Just, you know how sometimes you're painting and all of a sudden the water will just splush. It'll just splush right from your brush onto your paper. And that is very aggravating because then you ruin the whole area. Well, you have to dab it up, let it dry, and repaint it. But these are less prone to splooshes, and that is a technical watercolor term. You'll have to look it up though, but I'm pretty sure it means when a bunch of water all of a sudden rolls down to the tip of your brush and jumps off onto your paper and makes a big old watermark. Splush. So now I'm coming, her nose is dry, so I'm coming in with some darker colors. I'm painting wet onto dry here, getting those shadows in, getting some texture lines in. Her nose is starting to shape up here. Her nose and around her eyes are the darkest parts of her. That's the darkest values we have. And I'm just gonna layer that nose up with all, going from lightest to darkest, as one does with watercolor. That's how you do it. You go from light to dark because, of course, it's a transparent medium. Her nostrils are looking a little bit odd, but I'll fix those later. Sometimes your painting has to go through that ugly duckling stage. So now I've added a little water to her shoulder. This is the side of her shoulder, or maybe the top part of her neck, as her little head is sort of cocked and posed, as cows do for the camera sometimes. They'll just cock their little heads and pose for you. So sweet. So I'm adding a nice medium brown here, and then coming back in with a darker brown just in some of the shadow areas, using that darker brown right underneath that dark part, that dark bottom lip part. And now I'm just wetting her, the front part of her face, down her nose, wet it with some clean water, gonna drop some brown in. I'm keeping the edges very irregular. Her hair grows sort of in patches, and it grows in different directions. As it goes down the nose, it starts to sort of curve around her nose or her muzzle. In the front part of her forehead, down her front part of her face, it just goes sort of straight. So I'm just doing some jiggity jaggedy irregular. Jiggity jaggedy is also a technical watercolor term. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm doing some jiggity jaggedy marks just to indicate where these patches of fur, these clumps of fur. And she's got a little darker area right almost in the center of her nose, so I went ahead and dropped in a little darker brown right down the middle. Now I'm coming back to my lighter brown, it's almost a yellow ochre color, and I'm going into my sort of mid-tones. And you notice I'm not painting solid shapes. I'm letting a lot of that underpainting, that really pale yellowy gold color, shine through in some spots. So I'm not covering the whole areas. I'm letting some texture of the bottom part of the paper shine through by, leaving it dry. And I'm working on her little cowlick here, her pole. She has a pole. I've been told by farmers that little humpy thing on the top of their head is called a pole. So that's what I'm working on. And just putting in a little bit more shadows around her eyes and on her forehead. And I've wet it a little bit first because you can see how well that paint is just sort of blending out. This is a simple painting. It's just, it's browns and blacks, really. I mean, it's not really a black. It's a dark mixture that I call black, but it's really not a difficult painting. There's a little blue, little brown, a little sepia, and, that's it, basically. So it's really a simple painting. And I'm wetting the inside of the ear, and I'm just doing a really watery wash. Her ears are really fluffy. I'm also making sure that I make sort of strokes in there to look like fur. Coming back in with a little bit of the darker brown right in the center where the opening of her ear is, just to mark that out. Adding a little bit more darker shadows around her little chest, under her chin. Her chest is under her chin. And I don't want that to be real defined, so I did it really watery and pale under her chin. She's starting to shape up. She's starting to look like a cow now. I'm going to work on this side of her face. I'm trying to work around the whole painting, but I don't even think that's correct grammar. I'm not very good at doing that. I have a tendency to want to stay in one area and finish that area completely, but I'm trying to train myself to work all the way around the painting so that I get a good balance and it looks unified. So just adding a little bit more browns here. I'm following where the shadows are. I'm letting a little bit of that really pale golden yellow color shine through in some areas for my highlights. I'm using some of the darker brown, of course, for my shadows. I'm working in some areas. I'm wetting the paper first so that I'll get those soft blends. In some areas, I'm working wet on dry so that I'll have those sharper sort of clumps of fur more defined, because I got a little secret that you're going to find out at the end. It's a little secret that I do to a lot of my animal paintings, especially one with a lot of heavily textured fur, but you'll have to wait and see. Haven't gotten to that part yet. So now I'm just going to wet his little neck around here. I'm putting in even darker colors, and you notice I'm trying to not have a lot of defined edges here. I want it to be really soft, really blended. I'm letting a little bit of the white of the paper shine through. I want all of the focus to stay on my little calf's face, so I'm not doing as much texture on her body. Now I've wet the background, and I'm taking some of that really deep blue that I have and just dropping it into the background. I don't want a solid even wash. I want it to be not variegated, but I want it to have some lighter areas and some darker areas. That's sort of variegated, but not quite. So I'm also taking some of that blue up into her ears so that it looks like she has fringes of fur, so it's not just a hard edged line. And we're going to wet right above her other side of her head and put in the blue. And you can even drop a little bit of clear water into it while it's still wet, and it'll give you some really beautiful blooms in that dark blue background and give it more interest. So now I'm getting my mixture mixed back up. This area over here is dry. Do not do this unless it's dry. And I'm just painting in her eyelashes. She's got some false eyelashes, and they are thick and beautiful. But are they Maybelline or are they the cow? We don't know. I'm calling them falsies because they're so long, but they're really not. Well, they might be. I don't know. I don't know what cows do in this day and time. Everybody's just evolving. Now I'm doing some texture around her nose. She has some little marks where she has whiskers coming out around her nose. A little texture, so I'm just putting that in there with the tip of my brush, just little dots. I'm going ahead and defining around her nose with some of the darker brown. I'm adding in a little bit more shadows, and I'm making sure that I am doing those fur strokes, those little strokes that are uneven. I'm not trying to get any really straight hard edges. I want the edges to be fringy like fur. And I'm just adding a little bit more shadows in there, and the way that I'm doing that is just putting a little darker brown over the areas that are already dry, and that makes it darker in that area. Again, I'm still trying to be mindful to let some of that light color that we first put on to shine through to give it some highlight areas. Now I've jumped back over to my ultra pointed round Loew-Cornell. Love this brush for fur work and for really fine details. So I'm going ahead and I'm mixing some of the brown with some of that dark black mixture, and I'm putting in the darkest area of her face, right, the darkest shadows, just adding it, layering it up. And I'm trying to look, her fur grows in a lot of different directions on her face, so I'm trying to mimic the growth pattern of her fur on her face, so just so that it looks a little more realistic. I'm not going for photorealism, but I do want it to look like a cow, or in this case a little calf. She's a little sweet calf. So I'm going to let you watch a little bit, listen to some music, and I will be back in just a second to explain some more, but enjoy the music. Okay, so I've layered a lot of colors over a lot of the browns, layered them up to indicate shadows and highlights. Now I'm doing my secret trick. The face is completely dry. Make sure it's completely dry before you do that. And I'm taking my big soft brush, wetting it with clean water, and I'm just rubbing it all over. I'm just painting her whole face with clean water. And what that does is I call it micro blending. It blends all of those hash marks and those fur marks. It just barely blends them together so it softens them up without losing the texture. But make sure that it's completely dry before you do that wash of clean water. Now I've just came back with a gel pen. I'm adding some highlights just to define some areas. I found this new gel pen and it's like I just can't stop using it. So any excuse I have, I just want to use it. So I'm just adding some highlights here and there. And yes, it's okay if you use other mediums with your watercolor. You want something that you enjoy and something that you like. It doesn't, you don't have to put strict rules on yourself. And if no one has told you today, you are doing a great job. So just keep on keeping on. And don't let other people put rules on how you make your art. So I decided I was going to put some white highlights in there with my gel pen, and that's what I'm doing. Doggone it. And we're almost finished. I think she is the cutest cow ever. I love cows. And I hope you've enjoyed watching her, and maybe consider trying this. It's not really difficult. If you watch closely, you'll see it's not very difficult. And there she is. She is beautiful. Let's remove the tape. Let's look at her. I'm going to sign her and she's going to be done. Just sign her and she's done. Now, if you've enjoyed this, thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up, give me a comment, or share this with someone that you think would like it, someone that likes art as much as we do. And it helps my channel so much. I just really appreciate you. See you next time.